continue this conversation, then I'm joined in studio by Prof. Anthoni van Nieuwkerk, who is the Professor of International and Diplomacy Studies at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs at Unisa. Prof, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. You've heard from Catherine there as well. How different will this presidency be compared to the first, do you think?
It's difficult to speculate, but I suspect that like the very cold temperature today in Washington, relations with Africa will also be cool.
They weren't very heated the first time around either, were they? I mean,
remember the famous line, which I can't repeat here on air, what he called African countries, a real throwaway. That really marked a very negative, and also it took very long for the Americans to appoint an ambassador to Pretoria, to South Africa. And when she came, she was a businesswoman with very little diplomatic experience. But Biden visited Angola last month in the dying days of his presidency. First ever African visit by an American president in a long time, if ever. And we all wondered, why is he going to Luanda? And that's the key for me of what we can expect. The American national interest, whether it's Biden or Trump, this or that political party or president, national and security and economic interests determine American foreign policy. That's true for the Middle East and for Canada and Mexico, but also true for Africa. In Luanda, there's a lot of money being invested to counter the Chinese and Russian influence, and particularly to build a rail corridor to Central Africa to extract those rare minerals that every big economy needs and wants to build EVs and smartwatches and so on. And the Americans are investing there. If Trump and his team are going to do anything, it'll be to continue with that military and economic interest in particularly Sudan, the DRC, and maybe South Africa.
So that would mean that they'd have to increase ties. They'd have to speak a little bit further to Africa, speak a little bit more to Africa as well. The last time we had a US president in Africa before Joe Biden was Barack Obama, came to South Africa, of course, for the Nelson Mandela lecture. Had also been to countries like Kenya, of course, where his father's homestead is ultimately true. If that's not happening again, Africa basically loses its place in that conversation. The likes of AGOA, those deals almost fall by the wayside.
I'm afraid you're right. And so Africa and South Africa as well need to work out what its place is in this evolving or emerging world order, or disorder as some people call it. And I think the key to South Africa's foreign policy is that there's a lot of investment in the BRICS, in the enlarged BRICS alliance of prominent global South countries, and they are increasing by the day. Indonesia has joined the other day, Nigeria has joined as a partner country, and so on and so on. A lot of investment there to counter the possibility, which I think is strong, of the Americans downgrading their diplomatic relationship with South Africa. And this is not new, and we should be ready for it. Our ambassador and our president should be ready for it, because we know that there are conservatives in the American system, in government and in their parliament, in Congress, who wants to have a review of South Africa's relations with the United States, including the trade relationship, because they view us or our government as cozying up to their enemies, Iran, Russia, China, and others.
And of course, the situation where we went to the ICJ didn't necessarily please the United States.
That didn't warm their hearts either, so temperature is cold.
Is globalization coming to an end? And I ask that question because you see the protectionism happening out of the United States. Europe itself has gone through its own situation where there's so many countries that are fracturing. Africa, in many ways, needing to look after itself too, because there's so many people who perhaps don't want to look after Africa or are looking after it for their own benefit. Is globalization coming to an end?
That's a difficult question to answer now in the studio, because that requires a lecture at Unisa, and maybe I should...
I'll attend if you want.
I'll invite you. Yeah, we'll invite the studio to come over. So that's something to examine in great detail. And globalization has its discontents, and the apostles who preach globalization as the answer to problems of poverty and inequality. I think it's taken a dip. America's isolationist and tariff war preferences under Trump will speed up this disconnect. But it doesn't mean that this globalization, meaning the internationalization of capitalism, is over. If anything, paradoxically, Africa, with its enormous potential over the next couple of decades, young population, eager for education and jobs, with feet prepared to run, in control of AI. They understand smartphones better than me and you, or maybe me. You're still young. And then, of course, we've got rare earth minerals in Central Africa. And, you know, South Africa has uranium. We've got the stuff that the Chinese and the Russians and the Americans want. So we are, and by the way, because of these dynamics, Trump might say to China and to others, I'm going to institute a tariff war because I want jobs to come back to America. What he doesn't explain very well, in my view, is that the Chinese and the American economies and the consumer economy is so intertwined. The one depends on the other. Whatever China makes, they sell in America. 100%. Whatever America wants to make, there's a competition with China. They depend on each other. The same with the Europeans. They might be in trouble, and Germany might not be able to replicate this miracle of the Chinese building electric vehicles at a cheap price. And the VWs that you drive and the Porsches that I, you know, we can't compete. So the Europeans are in trouble economically. But I do see, because of the intertwinement of economic relations, also paradoxically between Germany and Russia, will prevent a complete breakdown of globalization.
That's going to be interesting, because they've had to cut off gas supplies, which has been a very important feature, of course, for Germany. But I don't want to talk about Europe. I want us to really focus as much as possible on Africa, if we can. Because I feel that we, as you said, have these minerals that we have always said are so important. That young population that you speak of. It's always been the case, though. And yet we haven't been able to move to the forefront of these economic systems as well, and being able to get Africa moving forward. Why is that still the case? And with this dispensation in America, where they're looking inward, do you think that creates greater responsibility for us?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think the challenge we face, let me say something, maybe it's innovative, I'm hoping, as we wait for 7 o'clock for the inauguration.
Indeed. I mean, we've got live visuals as well. They're just on the side of our screen. So,
Yeah, everybody's wearing 3 jackets.
Indeed, yes.
Think about it like this. We know that in the American system, under Trump, under his administration, he's Secretary of State, he's National Security Advisor, and he's going to appoint, we think, Peter Pham, who will become the Deputy Secretary of State for African Affairs. He's assembling a team of conservatives around him who will advise him on Africa and on South Africa. All of these that I've mentioned, including the incoming UN ambassador and others, this team that he's assembled, take a dim view of the ANC's foreign policy, preferences for working inside the BRICS alliance with China and Russia and Iran in particular. We know this. How do we prepare for this? If you assume, like I do, that South Africa has a fairly strong economy, continental-wise, and it is driven by capitalism, not socialism, and that America is the world's biggest capitalist economy by far, although challenged by China, shouldn't we then ask our entrepreneurs, our businessmen and women, the private sector, our trade union representatives, how do we structure a new relationship with Trump over 4 years or 5 years or even beyond? How do we find a way to live with the biggest capitalist economy in the world without cutting off, what is that English expression? Cut your nose to spite your face.
Indeed,
We don't like Trump. He's conservative. He's going to chase out all the immigrants. You know, he's got a strange domestic agenda. He doesn't like this and that and the other thing. We can play that game and make the noise with others. All we can say, in our national interest, in the interest of growing our own economy to address poverty and inequality, who do we team up with? And I'm of the view that we must find a balance between our trade relations with their 4 partners. It's the Americans. Whether we like Trump or not, it's the Americans. It's the Europeans. It's the Chinese. And then lastly, we're trying to build a free trade agreement in Africa in a way that will benefit our neighbors, but also ourselves, because Africa has a lot to offer. And maybe that's the key to say to the Trump administration, we might not speak the same political language, ideologically, because we are on the BRICS side. We're a prominent member of the Global South. We have a strong political view. But in the interest of economic growth and improving the quality of life of our own people, if not the continent, let's talk a deal. And that's the kind of language that Trump likes, because he's a transactional leader. Give me something, I'll give you something in return.
But he's wanted people to... It's been so weird, because he wants you to lean on the United States, but also wants you to pay for leaning on the United States. So it doesn't want you to be too independent, because then you're challenging the United States. But if you are leaning on the United States, pay for it as well. So which direction, how do you exactly cozy up? And you've just spoken about trying to form the right relationship with the United States and getting our business people involved, private sector as well, to really be involved here.
Yes.
Can you do that when messaging from President Trump, for example, changes from year to year?
It's difficult, but I think the only way to tackle this, and I think this is our ambassador in Washington's, Ibrahim Rasool's great challenge, is to look beyond the immediate. These tactical maneuvers, the chess moves on the board that Trump plays all the time and unexpectedly. The next thing is he go and visits Putin and they have tea together. Or what do they drink? I don't know if Trump drinks. Or they drink tea together. The best way is to look beyond this and to say, what are the interests, the enduring economic interests that we can work on? And let me give you a key. We need to end the war in Sudan. It is worse than Gaza or Ukraine in terms of casualties or victims.
100%.
Right? The same thing is in the DRC that is so rich with those minerals that everybody wants. It's a free-for-all. It's the Wild West in Central Africa. The Americans are interested in stability there for their own reasons.
Indeed.
So are we. So are we.
For that tech-industrial complex that President Biden spoke about. Prof, I'm actually going to have to cut us off, unfortunately.
All right. You'll come to the lecture then.
Clearly we can have a lecture. I might even be able to put in, I don't know, a dissertation of sorts maybe, and who knows, you might be able to mark it for me. But Prof, really appreciate it. 7 p.m., of course, the time locally that we'll be unpacking and getting to grips then with President Donald Trump then being inaugurated as the 47th President of the United States. A second term, so Trump 2.0. We had in studio Professor Anthoni van Nieuwkerk, Professor of International Diplomacy Studies at the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs.